Welcome. I am Mike Hendrix from SMB Golf, and my guest today is Rob Smyth from Cobalt Software, and this is the Tech Caddie podcast. Rob, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Mike.
How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. I see you do have on your Ohio State, pullover, and I will say I'm drinking out my Ohio State cup. So always a pleasure to talk to a fellow Buckeye fan.
Rob, I wore this especially for you. So the people that watch this podcast know I like to work in logoed vests on every episode. This is the first time I've busted out the Ohio State. I've worn the Appalachian State, which is where I went to school.
Right.
But I am coming to you from Upper Arlington, Ohio today. We could walk to the stadium and watch the game tomorrow. So
that's awesome. It's kind of ironic. I get teased a lot that, I have basically 3 or 4 different shirts, and it's either Ohio State logoed, it's Cobalt logoed, or I have 2 others being born and raised in Canton, Ohio. They're either Firestone or Brookside Country Club, shirts. So I kind of have a pretty limited selection of the shirts that I do wear, just because obviously what I like.
Yeah. Well, Canton, Ohio is, it's just such a really cool place. The cradle of football, really. I've got one son at Miami, Ohio, which is the cradle of coaches, but Canton, Ohio, the cradle of football. And it's cool to be from there. I think you guys have sent people to Penn State. You've sent people to Michigan. You've certainly sent people to Ohio State, but it's been awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So Rob, for people that don't know, Rob and I have known each other for a long time, actually competed against each other for many years on the sales side. And it's for like real golf insiders and long timers. If you hear Rob's name, Rob Smyth, spelled S-M-Y-T-H, you start to think like, I wonder, is that Smyth Systems? And this is Rob from Smyth Systems. And so, Rob, I thought it'd be cool to have you on today to not only talk about your journey, but you're one of the few people in golf technology that has this really cool perspective of the difference between family-owned businesses that get private equity money put into them. Like you've really seen a lot of different angles of that. And so I thought that'd be cool to talk about today, if that's okay by you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I believe in my mind, when I think Smyth Systems, I think early 90s. And I think it was your father, Robert, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It started in probably the first install of a club's, golf point of sale system started in probably the mid to early 80s. He was a member at Brookside Country Club in Canton, Ohio, and the golf pro there was Jim Logue, and they needed some assistance on just managing the inventory and so forth. And my family's business at the time was also in retail stores. And if you can believe it or not, being from the Columbus, so we actually were doing software for the limited locations way back in their early beginnings, because we actually had a retail division that did, multiple store locations like Hot Topic, the things you see in the malls, nowadays, everything Rubbermaid. So we had a retail application that was, something that pulled stores and, short store-to-store transfers and receiving and pretty high-end retail stuff.
Right. And so Rob mentions the limited in Columbus. And for people that don't know, so Columbus, Ohio is the home of the limited, Lane Bryant, Victoria's Secret, the whole thing that Les Wexner built. And it's interesting that you mentioned Jim Logue because, Jim's family still remains in golf today. I think maybe one at Springfield Country Club. And so that's a really strong lineage, that name. And so it does make sense to me. It's interesting you mentioned retail and point of sale, because actually we're starting to see that some like with the Square,
right,
or Lightspeed actually would be a good example to these people that are saying, I actually am not from golf, but I want to be in golf, right? And so maybe we can talk about that later. But so at what point do you start working for your dad? I don't know how old you were when Smyth got started, but at what point can you start to contribute to the company?
And I started thinking about this. So I started working summers, doing a couple different things, but primarily the manual labor, right? Mowing lawns, moving office furniture and stuff. I was doing that, started in 1988. Just kind of working on the demo system and help build certain things, when it was raining, but mostly, doing the manual labor, moving offices and filing cabinets and and so forth. And then once I graduated, I did go to University of Toledo. So I'm not an Ohio State, alumni, but obviously growing up in Ohio, it's much easier to root for Ohio State than, because you see them on TV a lot more than Toledo.
This is true.
But as part of that, then I probably started going to my first PGA show in 1992. And this actually was the PGA West show even before it moved to Vegas. It was actually in Los Angeles. And so that was my first PGA show. So I think it was almost like 37, 38 years of consecutive years of going to PGA shows, since 1992 up till about 5-6 years ago when I stopped going to shows. So it's been, I'd say starting at that point, but really diving into the software and being a part of that was probably started in 92. And then 96 was when I really came into the software full time after college.
And was your father a coder? Maybe he was simply a great project manager and could find people to write software. Like, talk to me about how that even came to be.
Yeah, so my family's business actually started in 1949, and his father started it, and it was more on the cash register side of things. We had really 3 divisions of Smyth. One we called the district, or the cash register, where we would supply grocery stores with the big NCR grocery store scanning equipment, cash registers, Suida, NCR, Data General, right? Some of those old technologies. And then had immediately moved into, my dad more had a background on the retail side. And then so with that background in retail, wasn't a coder, ended up actually becoming roommates with a gentleman named Bob Duncan, who was really kind of the brains of really the coding and the software components. And they ended up being roommates, kind of got introduced. And my dad was looking for somebody, and my dad actually wanted to go into politics. And his father the business was struggling a little bit. I have a couple uncles that were in the business as well. And so he decided he'd come into the business, help get things back on their feet, and then obviously never left.
Got it. Okay. And well, I'm glad he stayed out of politics. That's
yeah,
good.
Me too.
And so, listen, my perspective would be, and so in 92, right, you go out to LA you really are starting to self-train on how to sell, right?
Yep.
You're starting to learn about building relationships, asking probing questions, learning what clubs need. Geez, tell us a little bit, like, where were clubs in 92, 93, 94 in terms of the technology they were using? Yeah. Were they all giving you the Heisman and saying, stay away, we don't want technology? What was it like at that time?
It was just getting started, especially as you got a little bit more towards the mid 90s, where Windows really started to come out to make something easy to do, right? So prior to that, and most people, depending on the age, we were dealing with really Unix boxes, big commercial grade Unix machines, dumb terminals, which are just monitors and keyboards that were still connected back through something that was called a digiboard, right? A big 25 pin, connection back to the server somewhere, usually obviously in the same building. So as part of that process, everybody was interested. They wanted better reporting. They wanted better analytics, right? They didn't want to do, and some golf shops are great, just working out of a cigar box, right? Take the money, throw it in a cigar box. But then there's operations that really did need something specific. And one of the benefits that Smyth brought into this was the uniqueness of being able to do private, semi-private, and daily feed. So we could do the smallest municipalities. We could do the mid-sized, semi-private clubs. And then we start naming some of the clubs and resorts that we got into because of our retail background. At one time, and you started naming the Woodlands, Kapalua, Oakmont, the Muirfield Village, right? You started naming all these operations because they had a significant need for retail applications, like Doral, another great example. So Smyth could
go all these clubs you just mentioned were Smyth customers?
That is correct, because not only could we handle the tee time application, any membership application, but we had such a high-end retail store-to-store transfer, open to buy, right? All the stuff that most golf shops don't need because of our experience in the retail space. So if you went to Kapalua, all the retail shops in the hotel, plus all the retail shops in the golf side of things, all the different clubhouses, we're all using Smyth. So Doral and their 5 courses, the breakers, right? Even all the sundries, the men's shops, the ladies' shops. So we would handle all that and then do the communication back to hotel charging. And so it got pretty complicated, even back in the early 90s on what the system could do technology-wise.
Wow. And so Rob, one of our business lines here at SMB is we track data. Uh, well, we track software that golf courses are using
Sure.
that becomes data, and we share that data with different companies. And so that does get into market share. And I'm curious, in 94, 95, who are you competing with? Where does Smyth stack up in the ecosystem of say club software or club technology vendors?
Right. Well, I think definitely by far, depending on the market, because our competitors at the time would paint us into a certain market that was opposite of what we were competing against. So if I'm in a private club environment, they would tell everybody, well, they're just a semi-private daily fee system, because that part was true. So they would, so depending on the salesperson that we were competitive against, would dictate what people would say. But I think when you run into that, there's the benefit of having diversity into certain things. But I also think that's, could be a little bit negative, because you don't, leave the main thing the main thing. So as part of that, if we would have just focused in one particular area, obviously the system could have grown at certain speed for that particular market share. But because we dealt with daily fee, semi-private, private, right, we had to divide our resources on where that software could grow.
Okay, that's good to know. And so, and I think we'll get into this a little deeper. You're coming at this from a classic family business. You're probably talking to your dad at the dinner table or something constantly about this deal or that deal and growth, and
Right.
here are the challenges. Are you competing against, like, so if, for people that don't know, there was Gary Jones had Gary Jones Software, I think it was called, or something
Right.
like that. I mean, what are the names that you were competing against?
So it was definitely Jonas Software, kind of started in around.
And so Gary Jones became Jonas, for people that don't know.
Yeah. And then Crescent Software was, out in the 90s. There was Four Reservations that started becoming pretty popular, but took a completely different approach. We still had, in the private club world, there was another family-owned business called Diamond Management Systems. There was another one called Country Club Systems, and then Country Club Systems and Diamond Management merged to create a company called CSG, so Club Systems Group, right,
Yes.
which is also now owned by Jonas. So yeah, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but Smyth was Jonas's first acquisition in the early 2000s, and CSG was their second. I think now they're up to like 180 companies underneath the Jonas umbrella. Again, I don't know specifically. The last time I checked, it was pretty extensive.
Someday we're going to have to do a podcast with either somebody from Constellation or Joe Oswald just recently left, I think, Jonas. I'll have to get Joe on. Maybe he's a little freed up to talk, but it's amazing. That story is an amazing story too.
Yeah.
And you just should share with everybody. So ultimately Smyth gets acquired. Talk us through that journey a little bit. At what point are you starting to listen to offers? Why does your dad decide this is the right move? Share a little bit about that.
So I think kind of what's missing here. Right around in 1998, my father passed away, and so his right-hand man, Dwight Jellison, who I still stay in touch with and do consider also one of my mentors in a lot of different ways, and have a lot of respect for him as well. Kind of took over. I mean, it was a very logical next step. I had two uncles in the business. They kind of stayed involved. We had offices in California and Denver and Texas. So as they were managing different parts of Smyth, it just made sense for Dwight to kind of fill those shoes. So as kind of time went on, we were, at the time, our product was written in code base called Cobalt, which is, something way back from the early 80s, and was just one of the original developing code software. So we had then started to write the software in a SQL-based application starting in the late 90s. So we had started releasing new software, and probably one of the first SQL-based applications to come out to the space, late 90s, early 2000s. And then really as part of that process, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Bill Booth, right, from a private club technology standpoint. He used to work for a company called McGladrey.
Yes.
Which used to be RSM. And so his job there was to really help private clubs start to look at club technology and help them from a consulting standpoint select, their new system. So as people were either on Abacus 21 or Club Tech, right? Again, some of these are very old systems. What do they do as they migrate forward, right? And we're also talking at a time where most people didn't have food and beverage point of sale.
Right.
In a private club environment, they were really doing handwritten chits, and entering those in the back office at the end of the day. or the next day. And so as part of that process, the technology was changing so fast that these clubs, and particularly bigger clubs, really needed to have somebody assist them in what to select and why to select it and the questions asked. And those presentations, I always kind of referred to those as a Bill Booth demo, because it would take the entire day. You would show up at 8 o'clock, 8:30, set up, and then from 9 to 5 o'clock, they're rotating in each department, and you're going through accounting functionality, food and beverage, golf, tee times, right? All the different software modules. You would spend the entire day there going through that process. So we really started kind of, especially down in Florida. I moved down to Florida in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And right about 98, 99, I started spending a significant time down here and really started growing the Smyth client base, from at the time, probably 10 to 12, and now we're up to almost 30. And so we really started, in my opinion, kind of taking charge in a market that is probably one of the better, markets for golf technology. If you're going to make it anywhere, if you can do it in Florida, you can do it just about anywhere. And so as part of that, I think we got people's attention pretty quick that was normally would not be going to a Smyth client, right? All of a sudden now, because I'm there, I'm spending time, I'm building the relationships. I think when you are, and this is kind of consistent throughout my career, when you're not the leader in a space, right? There's things you have to do differently. And not that you're doing them differently intentionally, like you have to check all these boxes. It just becomes innate to what you need to do to win. Right. And you want to do it in the right way, and you want to do it to make sure it's a good fit. So
because you want the business to last. You're not looking to win a 1 year or 2 year deal.
Right.
And so that, to your point, you got to do it in the right way.
That's right. So I think we just, through maybe just dumb luck of what I did and how I watched my dad or whatever else, I knew how to, what I believe was to outsell the competition. Right, to be able to understand it. Now, also with my background, right, growing up in the private club world, spending time, it's watching the installations go on from such a young age, I had a great understanding of how to connect, right, what technology can do to what the life of the operator goes through.
That's
so
right.
When they talk about, well, how does this work? It's not showing them a feature list, right, of saying, well, it can do A, B, C, and D. Right, you're there to solve problems and show them solutions.
That's right.
So
I've always felt, at least in this space, the best salespeople are actually the people that are product experts, right? And actually have spent time in the golf shop, have done installations. They understand all those, but those become the best salespeople, and that's essentially, like, you basically created that model, right?
I mean, it was just kind of what I fell into. I've always, exactly what you said. You have to be a chameleon. You have to be able to, especially in a private club world, right? You have to understand what the golf shop operations goes through, what the accounting goes through, right? And so that's a lot of hats. So no matter what your background is, unless you have significant time in the industry, it's hard to know those stories. It's hard to understand why we build minimums a certain way and why you do tee times with rules and guest play rules, and how that relates, so they can understand what you understand their business, right?
That's
it's not
right.
just a feature list, right? You actually understand it.
Now, the other, kind of superpower you would have had at that time is, and even if it's not intentional, the way you're speaking with people is you're saying, well, this is why we built this. This is why my father did it this way. That's so powerful when the person you're sitting with realizes, oh, this company is in this person's DNA. They wake up every day and they think about their wife and their kids and this company. That's all that is what this person is. And so I just feel like that is such an advantage.
Yeah.
Now, there's also a danger with family businesses that some people can become entitled and lazy, and that just gets into how you were raised, frankly. If your parents raised you in a way that you could do that or not do that. Clearly that didn't happen with you. This, Smyth was in your blood. You talk about the acquisition a little bit in detail, but then let's kind of follow on the Rob Smyth journey, right? Because it really starts to get interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So once Jonas acquired Smyth, I stuck around for a little bit, right? I was still fairly young at the time. I just moved down to Florida, right? I envisioned my livelihood, it's being this for my whole life, right? I didn't think anything other than this is, where I work, I, live and breathe, and I end up dying here, right? So that kind of, upset the apple cart a little bit. And as part of that, I'm not saying one thing is better or worse, right? My background, my experience, my journey, when you're dealing with corporations or you're dealing with venture capital monies, right? I'm not saying that money isn't important to everybody, but it seems like sometimes there is a priority that is different than a family-owned business, right? When it's your livelihood is probably the best way to do it. It's my dad was the first one in the office, second, the last one to leave every day, 12 hours a day, right? I mean, there was passion there. It was not, you were not there to punch a clock to get a paycheck.
And by the way, that's how we built this country. We built this country through, millions of small businesses like that. So go on.
So as I would, move down to Florida, and then I kind of, the way Jonas did things at the time, there was a dealership network. So I kind of got absorbed into a dealership network. And then I kind of lost my way a little bit because it was just so dramatically different. Again, not right or wrong, but to my journey, when you get away from the family-owned business, you lose what I'm going to call it passion, right? You lose that desire. You lose that craving to be number one and do everything you can every single day because it's somebody else's money. Right. At the end of the day. And again, that's just a personal opinion. And that's only because that's how I was raised inside of this world. That's what I've known. So I kind of, after a couple of years of doing that, was very fortunate to actually sell the first Jonas system from the Smyth group that got absorbed. It was down in Miami, and it was the Indian tribe that owned a golf club down there. And so I was able to kind of transition to do that. And then at the same time, there was a club that was transitioning up in Vero Beach. They were transitioning from Smyth to Jonas, and they were owned by a company up in Massachusetts. And so at the time, the general manager of Smyth called me and said, hey, they need some help transitioning. So I went up there and met with the CTO. The guy was the original designer of Hallmark music cards, right?
Yes.
Super smart guy. And so he goes, well, obviously, Smyth and Jonas. And I said, well, turn the card over, right? So I had two side business cards. One had Smyth on one side, one had Jonas on the other. And
so let me just put a pin in that for a second. So Jonas decided, or maybe Constellation, however you want to say it, Jonas opted to keep the Smyth system for quite a while, the Smyth name, for quite a while, correct?
That is correct. I mean, even today, when you go to the PGA show, their booth has a tower and they still have the Smyth logo on it.
Right. Okay. And so, but like you said, you got exposed also to the Jonas brand.
Right.
And just help us understand, the Jonas brand really does come from Gary Jonas. Yeah. Compute. And so Constellation, when they bought Gary Jonas's company, they just opted to keep the name Jonas.
That is correct. So again, these are some of these things. Obviously, I've come from secondhand nature, but when you look at what Constellation does, they go in and buy the industry leader.
Yeah.
And then they kind of go down and start gobbling up the other leaders in the space and roll them up into one.
Yeah. Which is the same model that we did at Golf Now.
That's exactly
or Golf Channel, I guess you would say. Yeah. We bought the number one, then we bought the number two, and then
exactly
more. So yeah.
Well, obviously that business model has worked out extremely well for them, and Constellation has been widely successful, in all the different software, tech that they've eventually, rolled into.
And so when you go up to this Massachusetts, and just as a side note, when Rob says a company owned this country club, there was a time that insurance companies and other companies owned a lot of clubs, right? That we went through a period in this entire industry where there were country clubs all over the place that were owned by the Hartford or IBM or what it was just a different time. But anyway, so when you make this trip to Massachusetts, Smyth and Jonas are two separate products. Is that correct?
That is correct. Being kind of sold at the time that, again, I think and this we'll be able to repeat the same history here with Easy Links and IBS here in a minute. But as part of that, it was, all right, so let's go ahead and use the Smyth software to do the daily fee, the semi-private, and keep Jonas running the private club and, kind of separate those out a little bit. It was kind of the goal. And it gave the dealership channel, they had probably 8 or 9 different dealers around the country that built significant businesses off of this. And there's 1 or 2 still in business today doing that for Jonas.
And when you say dealer, just to translate for today's, it's a reseller, right?
That's correct. They were a reseller.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so as part of that process, they gave the reseller really another channel to go after that they could not do with just Jonas. Yeah, and there's times they would go to a daily fee or something, but it wasn't designed. It was definitely a round peg in a square hole situation.
Right. So you have this interaction in Massachusetts, and that leads to.
Yeah. So then I started doing kind of a consulting job for this club in Vero Beach for about a year. And throughout that process, still be, working in the dealership, still working as that consultant. And then I ran into, at the time, I don't think he was president of IBS as of yet, but, it was VP of sales. The guy's name was Jeff Klein. Probably a lot of people on this call are going to know Jeff Klein. He works for Club Car now. But he's the one that kind of brought me into the fold at IBS back in 2005. So he's his kind of experience, my connectivity, right? You go to PGA shows for so long, you're going to start running into the same people. You know who all the players are. You have the relationships, right? You run into people out at night, and so we just had a good relationship. I felt my culture fit in pretty well with him.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to make. And what was attractive about IBS, is, you can see this family business thing again. That's what I remember. That's how I grew up in this space. That's appealing to me, which I think grew to some degree, right?
Yeah, I really felt after meeting, I knew I liked Jeff, right? I like Jeff a lot. I think our personalities are pretty similar. And then once I had a chance to meet Anthony Strange, who was the owner at the time, really just had a great connectivity with him. And, so I said, you know what? I've kind of lost this. Yeah, I'm the only Smith that's still a part of this Smith Jonas. I mean, there's no real personal tie. And I think what really started happening in that situation is there were so many of the clubs that were still on Smith that I had great relationships with that would call and say, I can't do this anymore. Can you help me do this? So their connection to me to get something done, whether it was a significant support increase or whether it was programming issues or whatever, it made no difference what my last name was, right? Because it no longer had any significance to be able to help those clients the way that I used to. And I gave it probably 2.5, 3 years. So I mean, I really did try to make that work and see what that looks like. But then again, at the end of the day, just like you said, to me, from a fit perspective, I felt like I cared more than the people I was working for, to make sure of client satisfaction. Again, Jonas support's great, so it's not, not that side of it, but from different things, it just, that was just different for me. And so I didn't feel home.
So Anthony's in Virginia at this point?
Yeah, Richmond, Virginia is where IBS was.
Oh, right. Okay. And so, but I don't think you moved to Richmond, did you?
I did not. I stayed in Florida and have been ever since. I moved down here in 2001.
And at what point do you, can you just share with us, at what point did IBS even come into existence? When did they see an opportunity to maybe solve some problems that other technology companies weren't in golf?
That's a great question. So it was ironic that I recently had this conversation. IBS actually came into play with their second client was American Golf. And right before that, there was
a management company for those people that don't know. Yep.
There was a couple people that, Anthony was a developer by trade, kind of a coder. So he was kind of in the accounting world, understood what things needed to do. So he had actually developed the first code, and it's going back to 1993. So IBS was one of those earlier, adoption. But what made IBS so widely successful was the management company side of things. So at the end of the day, as we then eventually got acquired by EasyLinks, we had over 110 management companies with 5 or more locations. But one of the major benefits, again, was you also had a product that could do daily fee, semi-private, and private. So it really got to a point where having that mixture, especially when you have these massive, management companies like Landscapes, and we didn't do a whole lot with Troon, but you have these people that have a lot of different companies, different types of clubs. IBS was a great fit.
Yes. Now let's just, for those people that maybe don't know intimately, when a software company wins a deal with a management company, it doesn't always mean that every golf course that uses that management company is going to use that software. There's still a lot more selling to go on. So for some of our younger developers that are out there that are building things right now, and they think, I just got to get Indigo Sports and everything will be great, hit the brakes. That doesn't always work that way.
Yeah. So it's a very resource intensive, right? There's a lot of demands, from that standpoint. So as we continue to grow, at IBS, and by the time I got there, they probably had 900 clients, so they were already a significant player at that time.
And of the 900, what do you think the breakout was, private to public, in the IBS at that time?
At that time, when I first joined, was very small on the private side. So one of the things that we did, IBS was reselling QuickBooks or Peachtree or something from the accounting side, and had accounting integrations to go work with other accounting systems. But to truly get into the private club world, we kind of had this private club initiative, and I told them, you need to develop accounting, right? You have to, clubs of these stature and these natures, if going into a very large private club, if you tell them that your accounting system is QuickBooks, they're not even going to look at you.
Yeah.
So at that time, we made a significant investment into an accounting system, brought on a lot of people, and actually then built an accounting system on top of IBS, to roll that out to the clients.
Which to this day, and so I mentioned that we track all the softwares that these clubs use. We have a list of clubs to this day that are using IBS.
Right.
And I can tell you almost 95% of those clubs, the reason they stayed with IBS is because of accounting. So your contribution there, Rob, was immense, because the accounting piece of IBS became so sticky. Other people that would come and try to get the club to switch to their, it was so hard to get anybody to switch out of IBS, because at the end of the day, the person in that CFO controller seat, whatever that title happens to be, they're the ones that are going to decide if they actually appropriate the funds to go buy the new software.
Right.
And when they do that, they know they're going to give up the accounting stuff of IBS. Right. And they don't want to do that, right? At the end of the day, these are personal decisions, whether you think they are or not. And so IBS found a way to be very, very sticky.
Well, and how ironic, being at Cobalt now, and again, we'll get there, but I actually just yesterday had a series of demos over the last couple of weeks, but as of yesterday was kind of the last one of a club, pretty close to you in that area, that I originally sold IBS to in 2012, right?
Wow.
So
it's still
that's right.
Exactly.
So, the ability to translate, and asking her, different questions, and she'll go, well, this is what we can do, and this is what we're doing. I'm like, well, you could do it this way on IBS, or this is how you. So knowing both systems inside and out was pretty awesome. And there was even something that I told her that the system could always do since the time they had it, because of their unique situation. And she goes, you got to be kidding me. We could have been doing this automated the whole time. And I said, yeah. She goes, I'm not telling the golf shop guys. And she goes, she'll be so mad.
Yeah. There are still, I've lived that exact same story, but with other soft. So I hear you.
Exactly.
So at some point, I think this is when I start to get integrated into golf and whatnot. I know Rob Smyth is this guy that's really good at IBS, right? I know that like IBS has this Rob Smyth guy, and it's difficult. And if I hear that he's on a deal, it's going to be difficult for us and that kind of thing. And then consolidation starts to happen, right? Companies start to realize that, wow, Golf Channel Golf Now is growing really quickly, and they're getting really big. If we intend to stay around, we got to grow. It's an arms race, essentially, right? That's why the acquisition that we made 2 weeks ago, the Internet Golf Database, that's why that founder, whose name is Mike Dickoff, that's why he named this stuff Software Wars, right? Because it became an arms race as to who could get big enough to survive. Right. And so Andy Weeks, well, actually, Andy probably would have been gone by that point, but Andy Weeks, a founder of EasyLinks, but the team at EasyLinks decides, we got to buy IBS. We got to go buy one of the big boys, so that we can at least be near the shoulders of golf now, if you will. Right. So talk about that acquisition and how you ultimately became an EasyLinkser.
Yeah, so I got approached by the owner, and again, at this time, we're probably in 2015. I got approached by the owner, and at this time also, I'm more of his right-hand man, on the phone with them on a constant basis. I'm a part of the leadership team, right, making, pretty executive level decisions from sales and marketing and direction of the product. And so as that process, he approaches me, and we had been approached many years before that by the Golf Now people, right? As they were starting to do some acquisitions, and then that kind of tailed off. And then Anthony tells me, I need you to come with me to Chicago. I'm like, all right, well, this seems a little bit on reverse. Usually I'm asking you to go to Chicago with me for some sort of sales, related issue.
Right.
Because at the time, IBS was running Medina, Conway Farms, Glenview, right? So we had some of the major clubs up in the Chicago area. And I'm like, well, why are you asking me, right? I mean, where are we going to go see? He goes, I'll tell you when you come up, right? So he kind of, maybe a week before, he tells me, this is potentially going on, obviously confidential, but we need to go to Chicago, and I want you to show the leadership team, in Chicago, the IBS software. And so he brought me along, obviously, to do the full presentation to show them exactly what all those fine nuances could do. Because I think the issue at the time, right, and where some of these companies struggle is to not really know what goes into a point of sale system, what goes into what you need to do for membership. You're good at one thing, right? You're great at tee times, but are you able to actually build? And that was one of the issues that Golf Now had for many years, at least from third-party exposure, was they could never get the point of sale, product really nailed down. Even when they tried to spend money and have people develop it and go out. I mean, it just G1 is a good example, right? From just again, my perceptive, that it was a failure, right? All the money that they spent, so they couldn't get that part right. And so again, it's the progression of where some of these companies go. And that's why I feel that you start doing some of these integrations, and whether they're commercial grade systems or whatever else, I think long term, to me, I don't think that's a very survivable thing. I think you're going to get a pretty good flash in the pan, but at the end of the day, if you don't own the IP, what do you really have?
Right.
Your
And
property.
actually, for people that don't know, EasyLinks bought their point of sale.
Correct.
At one time. EasyLinks really had developed a T-sheet and a call center product, but they ultimately purchased their point of sale. I'm drawing a blank right now. I think Harry bought his point of sale as well. I think 4 Reservations bought their point of sale as well. I'd have to check.
I'm not sure.
I can't remember, but I do know for a fact that EasyLinks had purchased their point of sale. Certainly, Golf Now tried to purchase one. Made a lot of purchases, but So anyway, go on.
And so then, as part of that process, again, I stuck around for about another 3 years. So through that time, we also acquired another company called Course Trends out of Austin, Texas. More of a website marketing, remarketing tool. They had a little T-sheet on the side.
And Course Trends, that's another interesting story. I'm gonna get Andrew Wood to come on here. Course Trends was really just a knockoff of Legendary Marketing, right?
Yeah,
100%. Another story we should tell in the golf space.
Let's just ask Andrew. He'll drive up in his Ferrari, right?
That's right. That's right.
10 minutes.
So it's interesting, Rob, because at this point, EasyLinks now is really not a family business anymore, right? There's a lot of investor money in EasyLinks. There's a crazy story that people can go find in the Chicago Tribune about EasyLinks and kind of who they became and whatnot. But I would imagine you got reintroduced to that non-family atmosphere during those 3 or so years.
Yeah. And I think, the big part of that was also owned by the PGA Tour, and again, to what level, and, I'll kind of, play ignorance on that. I don't know to what all the details were, but, teeoff.com, by PGA Tour was an EasyLinks product. I don't know any of the financial side or how any of that worked, but it was a part of this was, owned by the PGA Tour. And part of that was to really protect the golf industry against what Golf Now was doing, right? Is to not be, maybe a competitor in that space. And, that turned out to be pretty similar to begin with, but they really were a great competitor to Golf Now in that regards. So not only do we have,
I don't know if I'd say great.
Well, it depends on which way you're looking at it.
I'll go competitor. I don't know if I'd say.
Obviously, at the time had a long way to go, but when you start looking at, from an application side, right, we had more of the tools, maybe not the quantity and volume that Golf Now had, right? It's because you obviously, when you start sooner, you have more clients. And
so let me just, for some of the people that are new to this space, so EasyLinks ultimately was this T-sheet and point of sale company. Barter started to become a really popular form of payment. Right. EasyLinks wanted to be able to grow their company through barter, just the way Golf Now was. And so they created a tee time marketplace called Tee Off.
Right.
And so when Rob mentions Tee Off, because we were talking about EasyLinks, that's all one thing.
Right.
Easy Links and Tee Off, and then Easy Links, of course, makes this IBS acquisition that really made it clear to us at Golf Now, like, oh, okay, this is our Pepsi, right? This is who.
That's where you go. Yeah.
That's right. So, but let's stay with the Rob Smyth journey, right? So you get exposed to Easy Links. Now your Easy Links was really a cool place because Easy Links, much like IBS, they learned the importance of being able to network multiple courses together. And that, like, Troon loved that, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really kind of a calling card for Easy Links. And Easy Links was really good in the, like, transitioning to the cloud. They understood the power of being able to get out of servers and that whole thing. And so Easy Links really made a huge contribution to technology.
Agreed.
But ultimately you left Easy Links and actually did some things that weren't just golf specific for a short while.
Yes,
and then you come to meet these people at Cobalt and Cobalt Software, which is such an interesting story as to how Cobalt finds themselves in golf. It actually reminds you of some of the earlier days of how other companies got into golf. And that's where you sit today as a senior leader. Tell us about Cobalt and tell us how that all those pieces came together.
Yeah, that's actually a great place to wrap up. So as this is going back to probably 2012, 2013, when all the club software providers were connected or kind of reached out with an RFP from Boca West, right? And Boca West down here in South Florida, one of the largest club operations, right? 4 golf courses, 30 tennis courts, 8 pickleball courts, 10 restaurants, 3,500 residents inside the gates, right? I mean, it's a very large operation, and probably one of the most well-known because of the previous general managers, kind of the, really put CMA on the map and so forth too. So as part of that process, they were really putting out an RFP that said, we need significant resources. We want dedicated people for the next 5 years, to build us something because we're so unique. Well, everybody looked at them and said, well, this makes no sense. At the time, we all had, 1,000 clients or more, and you want us to ignore everybody else and focus on that. So everybody.
And honestly, there were stories, Rob, in golf. So IBS actually had, I'll call it a mistake. I'm not going to, I'll be the one to say IBS had made the mistake of, like, doing something special for Club Link, the big management company in Canada and Florida. And then everybody came to regret the fact that there was this branch off of IBS that was just for Club Link. And I think people in golf tech learned that long-term is not the best strategy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And so as part of that process, since everybody kind of turned them down, they're on a very old AS400. I think part of it was Abacus 21, which was way back from the 80s and 90s, from a system that was highly customizable to each install. So as part of that process, then our 2 CEOs knew each other. So the CEO here at Cobalt and the CEO GM at the time at Boca West knew each other. And Cobalt started in 1991. So it is a family-owned business, and they were in the insurance and healthcare world, doing basically accounting systems, commission tracking. So if you think of all the big name, it's Aetna, United Health, right? Some of these major names, not saying they were specific clients, but of that, that caliber, the top 100 health insurance companies were basically using our software, the Cobalt side, obviously not, Cobalt here. And so at the time, that was the business that they were in as we got approached, from Boca West. So we made the agreement at the time, at 2016 or so, it said, sure, we'll develop the software for you. We do something similar. We'll make a branch off, and, after 5 years, then we'll take this out to the rest of the market. So in the middle of that project, Cobalt was lucky enough to sell this product, just the software, called Vue, and that's VUE, to a venture capital firm or somebody out of New York that kind of then took all that. So at the time,
and that's the software that Aetna is using, correct?
Yeah, or some of the like Aetna.
Right. Yeah.
So we had, at the time, we were 600 employees, right? I mean, we're a significant size operation as a company. We sold off basically just the software, kept the business as we were getting ready to launch into Boca West. And so we kind of had a fresh start, if you will. And so since 2016 or so, this has been the only thing that Cobalt has done. So we did stay in a management contract with Boca West for those 5 years. And then we have been out to the private club world. Basically, the last 2.5 years is kind of where we've been to our first club manager show about 2.5 years ago.
But one of the bullet points is just for people in the industry. Today, when we say Cobalt Software, now it sounds like I'm shilling for you, but I'm not. I've never collected a penny from Cobalt. But today, when we say Cobalt Software, they are exclusive to the club industry, right? I mean, you are not powering pinball machines or that's what you're doing. You guys are in the golf space wholly.
Yeah, and dedicated, honestly, just to the private club space as of today.
Right.
And so we don't have some of the functionality needed. Not saying we won't get there, but we're going to be very intentional in where our direction is for the short term to ensure that we don't outsell our service capabilities. Right. We don't deviate from that plan. So we're pretty intentional to where we're going and why we're going there for the short term. But eventually, it'll be a time where somebody is going to say, we need you to do this, and because we have 25 clubs and some of them don't do that. So and that's just something that eventually we'll look at, when that time comes.
Right. Now, how did they find you? Or maybe you found out. How did that happen? And are you back in that family atmosphere again? Yeah,
so that's actually a great comment. So the ironic thing is, as they were starting to finish up the 5-year agreement with Boca West, the COO, her name is Stephanie Castro, also part of the family. So she's running the day-to-day operations, and she's heavily involved in talking with people like Bill Booth, who was a consultant I mentioned earlier. What is the software?
Bill still in Chicago?
No, Bill has retired out of the club industry, and he's living in Tennessee.
Okay.
And he's a professor for hospitality at one of the colleges, in Tennessee. So great guy, So as part of that process, when Cobalt was talking to various people in the industry, and I had gotten out of the industry because I made the mistake of assuming also that family-owned business equaled good culture, which after I left Easy Links and so forth, I went to a small family-owned business, and culture was still a problem, even with 20 employees and 3 or 4 family members. So I quickly learned that you can't equate the two of those together.
Not always, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Not always. Right. And so as part of that process, she kept hearing my name, right? Bill Booth, or there's Wendy Zerstadt, Tom Smith, and a couple of people in the HFTP world or the club manager world, said, if you're looking to do something significant in the club space and you're looking to grow in sales and marketing, the perfect person to talk to would be Rob. And so eventually she reached out to me, and we started having some really good dialogue. And once I kind of understood a little bit more about the product and what they were doing, I really felt comfortable with them as a company. And ironically, not knowing they're a family business at this point, which was kind of funny. So she asked me to come down to Delray Beach, and we had lunch, and she goes, well, our CEO, Steven, is in the office. Would you like to come over to the office? We're based out of Boca. And would you like to meet him? I'm like, well, absolutely. So we go over to the office and kind of walk in, and she walks, to the back part of the office in a nice, glassed in office. And she goes, Dad, I want you to meet Rob. And I looked at her and I go, Dad, right? And I said, I had no idea this was a family-owned business. And from that first conversation, he was a mixture of my dad and Anthony Strange built into one person, cared more about client first, wanted every single client to be happy, right? Was so driven towards client satisfaction that, again, we're lucky that we had sold the other software so that we have the runway to do what we need to do financially without any outside investors. And also didn't know this, but we have 6 family members in the office every single day.
Wow.
And so when you're looking at that and again, I've kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, you're really dealing with passion, and this is a lifelong commitment, right? This is something that is do or die. It's not just a paycheck. It's not somebody else's money. This is what you do every single day. Could make a decision that takes the company to the next level or not.
That's right. Because the COO, she is thinking to herself, every decision I make impacts my ability to put my dad's grandkids through college, right? It impacts our ability to do we have something to pass out? I mean, the decisions they carry, there's more gravitas on those decisions.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so you end up being really smart about those decisions. And very strategic, and it's a great place to be, I think. Yeah,
100%. And then so I've been here now full time for over a year and a half, maybe a little bit more. And then before that, I was doing some, I'll call it consulting, but just conversations, different things, how I would handle certain things. She was dealing with 2 clubs out in California, and just bouncing off ideas. What would you do? How would you have done this? Right, just kind of walking through some of that. also some of the software development things that they were doing. How do most clubs do this? How do most clubs want this to work, right? And just kind of walking through those things. So it's been over 2.5 years, to maybe a little less than that.
Yeah.
So I had to really, and again, to me, it's about the culture, right? I want to be able to pick up the phone, call somebody. My call is important. My time's important. Their time's important. But we both all are moving at the same speed, at the same goal, right? Which is that level of success. And we need to do what we can to make those right decisions. And this is the first time really since 2016 that I have felt that, because of, again, maybe just the way I was raised and family business side of it. And I don't think if you weren't raised in your own family business and I think you can, but you really do experience that 24 hours a day.
Right.
I imagine, it's the family down here in Boca, right? They're all very close, right? You're talking, Sunday night dinners, right? That sort of thing. There's no off switch, right? So,
right.
This is something that you bring home. And, I remember growing up and I had two uncles that were in the business. One lived in town. We never spent any holidays with them. and so one time, I said something, my dad's like, look, we spend, 60 hours a week together, right? So I don't need to do this over Thanksgiving too.
Right.
Really close. So, it wasn't not a negative sense. It was just one of those things that, they lived and breathed together every day.
That's interesting. Yeah, a lot of people don't experience that, so that's good. So I got a little lucky in the timing of this podcast because yesterday you guys pushed out a marketing piece. I think it was yesterday. At least I got exposed to it yesterday. It seems to me, and let me just back up for a second. So we've talked to some of your customers. So we use a lot of tactics to identify what technology these clubs are using. We found clubs that were using Cobalt, and we reached out to them and interviewed a couple of them and got strong reviews. Actually talked to one club that the club isn't open right now. Okay. They've brought you all in, but he couldn't talk to me a lot about the operational aspect of it because he was like, actually, I'm not taking tea times right now, And so, but then others, obviously we could, and they compared you to Club Essential and all kinds of different stuff. And lots of positivity there. But yesterday, and yesterday you pushed out a marketing piece that essentially was a message to me of, hey, Cobalt believes in an all-in-one approach, right? Cobalt believes in an all-in-one approach of technology to run your club. Now, you did have some asterisks, if you will, marketing, that would say maybe if you're a smaller club, you could make sense of using Uber Eats or something like that. Like you did allow for some small branches, but essentially, if I was reading things correctly yesterday, that's your value prop. You all are saying, why use 4 different vendors? Why have a T-sheet vendor and a member management vendor and a this and a that when you can do it all in one? Is that fair to say?
So that's fair to say with one little asterisk, and I'll tie that back to Boca West, right? The requirements for them, 4 golf courses, 30 tennis courts, fitness training, spa, manicures, pedicures, haircuts, right? We do over 300,000 reservations through our system every single year at Boca West, across all those amenities. So because
300,000?
Yeah, 300,000. Yeah, with 4 golf courses, lottery components, right? There's a lot that goes into that. Because we started there with that functionality because it was required. When we go into a certain different club, we are able to replace those best of breed systems because that's what we designed it for. So you don't need a special T-sheet, you don't need a different website, you don't need a different app. And then when you're dealing with some of these venture capital firms now, and you mentioned one of them, right? They're selling things under one umbrella, but it's technically 2 separate systems. Right. So with our system, and I think where people are just blown away is what you do on the app, what you do on the website, and what you do in the back office is all the same system. And so so from that standpoint, people are like, so I don't need a special app. I don't need a website. Even again, if it's the exact same company.
Can I ask you, you just made mention of when you get involved with these private equity firms or whatever, were you essentially there saying, because the guy that did the deal or the private equity guy, he's going to say, well, I already have a T-sheet company over here, right, and now I have a member management company. Why would I approve the development expense of a member management company building a T-sheet when I just stick them together and everybody will be fine? Because that's just his assumption or her assumption. Right. Fair to say?
Yeah, very fair to say.
Okay.
And that happens. That's what IBS did with the, Easy Links, right? We use their T-sheet and everything else in IBS.
Yeah.
And so those things, right, that makes a lot of sense to take advantage of those assets. But I think at the end of the day, when you really
It made sense for the private equity firm.
that's correct. Right.
Right.
But when you're still, again, you're trying to interface or integrate two products that weren't originally designed together. That's where you start to run into sort of issues. Some of the people we're talking to now, right, they have a website company that you call to ask support, and then you have a back office company to call and support, because technically they're two separate companies of being sold under one umbrella. Where with our system, right, you're calling support because it's the same system. So we actually control the settings in the app and the website directly from the back office when you're setting up the T-sheet, right? You're saying, all right, now how do you want the app and website to work? So you don't go to different places to do things. Typically, we're replacing 3 to 4 systems. We did a very large HOA project in California. Not just a club, right? A large HOA with different things. We replaced 12 systems.
Wow.
Right? And so again, that's a huge outlier. But also having said that is, yes, we are kind of that all-inclusive system, but we also do work with third parties, right? We work with like food and beverage inventory, Clear Sky, Food Track, Cedar Creek,
Yellow Dog?
Yellow Dog as well. Yeah, I know Jay Living Good very well, who also started at IBS.
That's right. That's right.
So
Jay, there you go. Jay had sent me 3 notes. There you go. You're on the podcast now, Jay.
That's right. Yeah, so I think he's a great guy as well. But I think we also will work with. There's a private club app that's out there, Pace Setter, that we'll work with. Whoosh is another one now that clubs are wanting us to integrate with. So we're more than willing to play with other vendors in the space as long as it makes sense. From that standpoint.
Okay, but that is a little confusing to me. Like, especially if I read the marketing material yesterday and then you talk about Whoosh or something like that. I don't know. That could be a little confusing.
Well, so here's a good example. Because when you're dealing with member-facing applications as well, not just behind the scenes, if it's behind the scenes and the club staff needs to deal with something, they'll throw money at it, people at it. They'll make it work as long as it doesn't disrupt the member. So I'm dealing with a very high-level club up in New York, and they just went to Whoosh, right? And so again, they haven't signed on with us as of yet, but soon. But they said, look, I just did this. Members like it. I don't want to upset that apple cart. So we're not going to force people. Again, we believe our product in certain situations is a better member experience when the dining reservations, the tea time reservations, the club reservations, right? That there's a reason why our app at Boca West has had 7,000 downloads, right? It is used by that age and demographic of member, because it is so easy to use. But if you start convoluting different systems and one system works this way and one system works this way, that can be a little bit of a struggle on the member too. So I do always, when we're talking to clubs, I do believe, and I'm not trying to just push our thing, it's more to me about that member experience, because if they know they can go to one place and do everything in its similar functionality, if they can make a tea time reservation, they can do a dining reservation.
Got it. Right. And so you're competing against everybody, I would think. North Star, Jonas, and then there's some people that you might compete with that others don't know about. Buzz Software, right, out of Toronto, I think they are, or some of these older systems. But oddly enough, people like Buzz, I mean, they have hundreds of clients. People don't realize that, right? They have hundreds of clients. North Star has hundreds of clients. Jonas and Club Essential, much larger than that. So here's the beautiful part, I think, of the private club business are the economics, frankly, right? So you just ultimately you have to think in terms of average revenue per customer when you're in this space. On the public side, there are a ton of technology companies that are happy to earn somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 a year from their customer.
Right.
On the private side, it is significantly larger than that. And so you can build a much larger, I want to say healthy company, much healthier company if you start in private. That would be my opinion.
The problem though with that is you're dealing with twice as much software, twice as much support, right? Twice as many headaches, right?
And a longer sell cycle for sure.
Oh,
you know that for sure. Yeah.
Talk
100%. A little bit before we go. Talk a little bit though about how the longer sell cycle in private isn't really a negative for Cobalt. because of the approach you all have taken, at least in these early years.
Yeah, that is correct. I think depending on the club and their seasonality. So knowing that, like, for example, a club in Columbus, Ohio right now, they need to make a decision if they're going to go live before season in April. They need to make that decision today. So if they're looking for that kind of thing, then their timetable gets dramatically increased, right? Or not increased in time, but from a speed perspective.
Right.
If I have a club down here in Florida that's talking to me now, they need to be live a year from now. So that sales cycle is a little bit longer. So depending upon where they are in their seasonality, as well as in their urgency to look, kind of dictates how long or short. But at a minimum, you're looking at 6 to 9 months. Again, depending upon what kind of emergency that is.
It's not unheard of to go 18 to 24 months for a sales, right?
It definitely can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's, especially us being more on the newer side, I had a call, it was 2 days ago with the club, and they said, we've been watching you. We've seen you at the shows, right? You're a little bit newer. You have our attention, but I'm just letting some of those things kind of iron out. And now that's been 2 years has gone by. And they said, you know what? This is something now I'm more interested in taking a look at. So, and most of these systems too are usually not, I want to say, aren't broken. Where, some of the daily fee stuff, if it doesn't fit your business, it doesn't fit your business. The private club side, right? They've been on the system for 7 to 10 or more years. So things aren't broken. They want to do more things. So I have a club up in the Richmond, Virginia area that is looking at us. And they're like, Rob, it's not broken, but if you're doing this, we'll wait till that following season. We'll struggle through. We know what we have, right? I know it can be better. So I think there's some of that comes into play as well.
What do you think the two top reasons are that private clubs switch? What drives a change more frequently than not?
I would say number one right now is support, right?
Okay.
And I think this is with any technology system in general. You could have the world's best software. If you have terrible support, it'll be a failure, right? So the goal is to have the best software, best support. But when you're talking days to get responses, that kind of thing, that frustration just builds and builds and builds.
Right.
And what I think this industry has really been missing from the family-owned aspect is really that partnership, right? I mean, any of the clubs can call our office today and actually get the owner on the phone.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I don't think, and maybe you could call some of the other companies and get to the owner on these venture capital, people, but you can't reach out to Battery Ventures and get to the top person.
Probably
right?
not.
And I'm guessing, right? I don't know that to be true, but
right.
I'm using that as an example to kind of make my point is that this is something that when you're talking as a partner and you care the way you care, development, support, all that matters because it's a reflection on you.
And
right?
then, so I thought you would say support, but that's why I asked for two, because
right.
I think it gets really interesting on reason 2 or 3. We'll set support aside. What's the next reason they switch?
The next is going from multiple systems and frustration of dealing with, like, a good example is when you have a separate tee sheet and a separate back office system. Some of these golf pros are spending an hour every day at the end of the night, right? So imagine in Columbus, people are playing golf till 7, 8 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
And now I have to spend a whole nother hour taking everything from this tee time system to put it into the back office, right? That's not what you want to do in that situation. It should just be one system. And I'll make this point clear, is that because we started much later, right? We have newer technology, we have better product, we were built for a larger operation. So we didn't have to add things on, right? We started up here, then we can scale things down for other clubs, which is a different approach than any other software company has ever taken. Right.
Where you started as big as you could imagine.
That's correct.
But very few people are going to use everything that Boca uses.
That 100%. So I think when we're able to come in and show them the amount of time savings, the support, right, the ease of use, right, because these things were, our VP of product actually came from the hospitality world in hotels. So he was the original, writer, if you will, of our food and beverage point of sale. Right. And so he took everything that he didn't like from Micros and Infogenesis and digital dining, right, all the big name ones, and actually made it into a club food and beverage point of sale. I mean, it's when I saw this, this is the best club point of sale in the food and beverage application I've ever seen.
Wow.
The integration with table management, dining reservations, a member could make a reservation on the app. It shows up at the hostess stand. They can apply it to a table, and then they roll it right over into the point of sale. I mean, it's all instantaneous. You know,
Right.
so those things, most clubs, you could do dining reservations, but it's not integrated to the point of sale, you know, or it's a separate system, right? And you got to hand key something in.
So because you do have experience in the public space, if I'm building a public company, if I'm 10-4, if member sports, if Eagle Club Systems, be great on support. I think this is what Rob Smyth would say: be great on support.
Mm-hmm.
And make it so your customer doesn't have to use a lot of different apps. It's a seamless user experience.
Yeah, that's why IBS was successful too, right? Is you want to supply as much as you can that fits in your wheelhouse, right? And stay away from those special projects, you know, that are one-off situations. You know, that would definitely be my recommendation. You know, and I think I read something you put out there, right? There's over 2,000, you know, it's the tea time systems or whatever you had put out there.
Well, there's I think we just logged our 59th company that helps golf courses sell tee times. So yeah,
right.
So
I mean, you start looking at that and you look at let's just say 17,000 golf courses, and there's, let's say, 6,000 private clubs that really fit what we do from the bigger side, right? And then you kind of remove maybe the top, the other remaining 5% or 10% that are always just going to still use a cigar box.
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a very small market for 59 different vendors, right?
I hear you.
From how do you monetize that down the road? That to me is when you have such big players out there that are significant size.
Yeah,
monetizing that long term is hard. But
of course, great things. The newest way we see to monetize is through credit card processing, right? Right. So many of these companies have learned to monetize through processing. Right. I am curious though, because I think it matters more on the member side, and so maybe you see it more than some of the public clients that we have. How often when they're shopping Cobalt do they say, "Now show me the member experience"? And I'm talking UI now, right? I'm talking about press this button or that button. How often are they asking about, but what is the member experience going to be? Because Rob, that matters a ton. Yep. At Muirfield Village, or I imagine you were probably referencing Wingfoot or something like that earlier. Like, talk about that a little bit.
So I would say that there's been a huge transition shift, maybe started about 5 years ago, to show me more of the member experience, versus in the past it was, let's start with general ledger, let's start with accounting, show me what financial statements I can get, because especially after COVID, right, the experience of what members want to do and now are willing to do on their phones is dramatically different than it was, before COVID. So when I actually do presentations now, if I'm doing a module or overview, right, I start with the app, right? Yeah. That's the first thing I do a company overview. I start with the app and say, this is what your members will see. And then I roll it into show the website's the same. And then I roll it into a la carte dining, right? And say, that was a reservation I just made. Now let's just follow it. Then I turn it into the application. So every one of those modules, I start with the app to show what a member goes through. And then I lead that into directly showing what the effect is on the back office.
Got it. Yep. Well, listen, growing a Cobalt is a lot of work. You're gonna crawl before you walk, and you're gonna walk before you run, and so we understand where you are. To me, I actually had looked at Cobalt from an investment perspective a couple of years ago, but I think before you were there, so I've known about Cobalt for some time. But when I heard that you were there, it honestly got my attention. I thought, okay, well, this is actually going to now have a chance to work. I knew the Boca story right away, which I thought was kind of different. But I think it's really cool what you guys have built, and I think there's a lot of people rooting for you, and you're the new family company, and there's a bunch. There's another guy, Jay Snyder in Louisville, has this company called Pro Shop Tea Times. Refuses to grow more than like 10% a year. Right. Told me a couple months ago, Mike, I can't have more than this many new clients. And I thought, I appreciate that. He's sticking to his plan, and I know you guys are doing something similar. So
yeah, we are. We're very excited about it. The attention that we've been starting to get, the name recognition that we're getting, right? Showing up at the shows. I've done so many speaking engagements on AI and some of the things we developed internally with AI. I'm actually going up to Washington, D.C. next week to speak to a group of private clubs from around the country. So it's to the point where the recognition is now there. And it is, we're a real company doing real things with really great clubs. I mean, our partners are some of the most, well-known clubs that you could imagine. And it's kind of fun to go into a city. I won't name it because the 3 clubs would be pretty, obviously to define, but to go into one city and go to 3 different clubs that have national name recognition using 3 different systems that are all interested in looking at you, it never had that at IBS, right? I mean, it's, we were always there, but it was, we got painted into different corners. And so what we've done, what the ownership has done, and the direction that the team has taken the product and the company, makes me feel at home. I couldn't be happier. And as we're now trying to, grow the sales team, because we've grown every other department, it's, some of the people that we've been reaching out to, and actually have had interviews recently. One of the guys I've known for a while was talking to Stephanie, who's our COO. And she goes, well, why would you now consider, coming on to Cobalt? And he goes, well, to be honest with you, I've been watching it for a long time. And the fact that Rob Smyth has been there now for almost 2 years is a pretty good litmus test of whether a company is going to be there or not.
That's right.
So I took that as a pretty good compliment.
No, I think I'm glad they found you, and I'm glad that you found them. So that's
100%. I couldn't be happier with what we're doing in the direction. And again, back to that, let's take over the world, one club at a time, but give clubs what they deserve. And that's really to treat our clubs the way they treat their members.
Right.
I think that's what it boils down to.
We'll have to you'll have to win the Scarlet business, right? Scarlet's hosting the Corn Ferry Tour this week, by the way. You'll have to win the Scarlet business, and then you can knock down Muirfield Village and Scioto while you're in town, and maybe even the golf club in Double Eagle. And then you get
That's right. That's a pretty trifecta right there. That was pretty good. Yeah.
There are some good clubs here for sure. So, well, listen, I appreciate you giving us as much time as you have. Your story is amazing. There's a lot of other family companies in golf, and then there's companies that aren't family companies, and both can find ways to be successful for sure, right? But it's worked out really well for you in that family environment. So we're really happy for you.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you for the opportunity. Always great to catch up, and go Bucks, right?
Yes, go Bucks. I think it's Marshall this week, and eventually it will get real, and the guys up north come to Columbus this year. So
we got to find 1 out of 4 years. We got to take this one.
That's right. Thanks, Rob.
Take care, Mike. Appreciate it.